You don't have to do it out loud.
Welcome to this special episode of the New Stack Context, and we're live from KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Europe. We're here today with Pratik Wadher, Vice President of Product Development at Intuit, to discuss their experience as a Kubernetes end user, as well as their involvement in the Argo Flux project, a single tool chain for continuous deployment and automated workflows using GitOps. Welcome to the show, Pratik.
Thank you very much, and good evening and good morning to everyone.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
We're also joined by the New Stack team, including founder and publisher Alex Williams, Job Jackson, managing editor, Richard McManus, senior editor, and I'm Libby Clark, editorial and marketing director. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
So Pratik, we wanted to talk to you today. I know there's been a big focus from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation on Kubernetes end users. Intuit is a big Kubernetes end user. So we wanted to understand from you how you're using Kubernetes and talk to you about your involvement in the open source community. But I think first we just want to hear some of your personal experience. What's the biggest challenge of working from home that's affecting the development of your infrastructure and Kubernetes development? Is it easier under the pandemic or harder to accomplish work, or is it unchanged for Intuit?
You know, it's been interesting. It's an interesting journey because I think when we went into this mode, I think there was a lot of unknowns. Everyone sort of worked to the best of their abilities, and we were keeping track of our sort of overall metrics to see how everyone was doing, both personally, mentally, as well as from a business perspective. And to be honest, it's been surprisingly good. We've seen productivity stay pretty much flat, in some cases increase, but we've been keeping a close watch on our overall workforce, and we're noticing that it's coming at a cost, right? We're finding folks are working a lot more, the hours are blurring a lot more, right? So that's really an area that we're beginning to focus on now, right, as a company.
So what are some of the ways that your team's keeping track of the projects and tasks? And have you kind of discovered new approaches? I know it is a challenging environment, as you say. Everybody's on 24/7.
It is. So, I mean, one thing is that Intuit is a global company, right? So we have sites, in the US, we're in Mountain View, California, San Diego. We're in India, Israel, the UK, France. So as a company, we've been used to sort of working with remote members and sort of keeping track of our projects and our priorities in sort of a remote manner. So a lot of that, core, I would say, methodologies and techniques were in place, right? Some of the things that we have been working on more recently have to do with being completely virtual, right? So where in the past, I think if you looked at meetings, how are we measuring meetings or how are we actually conducting meetings? We're moving to a format where we can, for example, do a lot of the legwork before a meeting happens. So in our case, for example, opening up a Google Doc and making sure that a Google Doc has captured the essence of the meetings prior to the meeting actually taking place. So when we walk in, it's captured. Also, it helps when team members cannot join a meeting, then they can actually look at a transcript of the meeting. What we've noticed is that video recordings are good, but it's very hard to sort of watch a video, right? Once you come in the morning and you say there's about 3 meetings you have to catch up on, then the videos don't work, right? So what seems to work is having a doc where you can quickly scan through, and actually having a transcript of a meeting. Folks are finding that that's even faster because they can quickly scan through the transcript and sort of figure out what the meeting was about and maybe look at the key decisions that were made, right? So there's some things like this that we're doing, right, which are helping, right, in general.
That's really interesting about the transcripts. We rely on them more than ever. We use a service called Otter.ai, and it's just tremendously helpful.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to turn the attention a little bit to your own infrastructure and your journey with Kubernetes. And one of the questions I love to ask is, how are you looking at the challenges that you face with what you want to see from the overall CNCF open source community? What are some of those projects that are important to Intuit and its own infrastructure and architecture development?
Yeah, there's actually, that's an interesting one and a good one. So I'll start with our journey, right? So we've been on this journey for about, I would say about 2.5 years now, right? We started on our Kubernetes journey about 2.5 years ago, and now we have a fully running, operating production environment, right? We have over 200 clusters. We have about 2,500 services in production running on Kubernetes. These include some of our flagship, properties like TurboTax and QuickBooks. So from that perspective, we are sort of well into the journey. We're well into sort of the operational aspects of it. We've gone beyond the initial onboarding and learning. The next phase that we're really starting to focus on are in 2 areas, right? 2 primary areas that we are actively working on with the community. One is around observability, right? So as we've now moved a lot of services into production, the ability to sort of monitor, trace, debug these services at scale is becoming even more critical now. And that's kind of where, I think you may have seen, we've had a number of talks recently, including at KubeCon, on the ability to actually, work with, for example, OpenTelemetry, the tracing methodology, some of the monitoring tools that we're, working on, right? And that's where the community focus is most important to us and where we are sort of starting to engage on that front. The other area that has become even more critical for now is on the networking side. So traditionally, we used to have a homegrown API gateway service, which is being utilized by all the services at Intuit, right? So all of north-south communication and actually all of our east-west communications also go through the north-south channel, right? Oh. And so that has, of course, been a challenge. And with Kubernetes, one area we've now focused on is the service mesh area, right? So we are actively working with the Istio community now. We're working with the service mesh, user groups and SIGs within the CNCF community to sort of help, understand this better, but also to start rolling this out in production. So we'll have essentially a 2-tiered approach where, essential services that need to communicate with users, external users, will use our traditional API gateway, whereas our, internal communications or east-west communications would go over a service mesh. So these are essentially 2 areas where the next challenge or focus for us is going to be.
Excellent. Excellent. In addition to these, are there any challenges that you see with Kubernetes itself, or any areas of where you feel Kubernetes could be further refined?
We don't, to be honest, right? We feel like the community has done an amazing job of resiliency, availability, and feature sets that you would require in an enterprise environment, right? So Intuit, of course, is a financial company at its core. So security, reliability were sort of the cornerstones, right? And we were, for example, working very closely with the Open Policy Agent, or the OPA team early on, because security and policy rules and engines were very critical for us as we were rolling this out in the enterprise. And I think we've done an amazing job as a community. The community has done an amazing job of making sure that these core tenets are in place. Can you do more? Of course, right? I would love to see more, for example, policy rules or engines inherently just directly built into the Kubernetes engine, right? Which we're working on right now, right? It'd be nice to sort of walk into an environment and have all of these policies that you can now just, confirm to your particular environment, right? So there are things like that. RBAC is another one where, continuously we see improvements coming in. And as we start rolling out, lots of microservices, that becomes even more critical. As you start introducing third-party dependencies, introducing more granular access control mechanisms become more important. So I think those are areas that, will see continuous improvement. But on the whole, it's been working very well for us.
So Intuit has just upgraded its CNCF membership to a gold level. I'm just wondering how you've found the experience of being in the CNCF circle so far, and what are you looking to get out of it longer term?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been a member of the CNCF for over 3 years. We've usually participated at the silver level as end user members, and really the decision to move to a gold member status was because we have a higher degree of involvement right now with the community. We're actually participating in a lot more areas, and we felt that it was sort of the right thing for us and for the community, for the end user community, to actually have a voice, right? We really wanted an end user voice in the overall community and the participation level, and making sure that we can also bring that voice for the community.
You're also very involved in the Argo project. I believe it originated at Intuit, correct?
That's correct. The Argo project actually originated. I was the founder and CEO of a startup called Applatics, which was acquired by Intuit. And the Argo project was, initiated at Applatics, but actually grew in scope and in the number of projects at Intuit over the last 2 years. Primarily because we saw a need as we were growing our Kubernetes, infrastructure. We saw, areas where, that were lacking in the community and areas that we could, innovate on. And our goal, of course, has always been that, we're not a vendor, right? We want to make sure that the community, gets to benefit from everything we do, because we actually do use a lot of what's produced by the community, and the open source world. So it was just a natural way for us to contribute, Argo to the community and to the CNCF this year.
So how does Argo compare to Flux, which is another GitOps project out of Weaveworks, and are the projects working together?
Yes, I mean, we actually announced a relationship last year. I think it was either at KubeCon or reInvent, I forget, between AWS, the Weaveworks team, and Intuit. The Flux project is a sister project within the CNCF, a mix of projects of Argo, right? And we've both been focused on sort of the GitOps mechanism and the GitOps methodology. So it was natural for us as we were looking at sort of expanding the scope and sort of educating everyone around GitOps methodology and making that sort of a standard that we would work with, teams that are already working on this, right? So So that was, we started working with the Flux team on essentially the GitOps engine, which is a core part of the Argo project. And about last year, the bulk of the effort has actually been in taking this engine, the raw GitOps methodology or GitOps engine, out of the core Argo CD project so that it can be used by anyone, right? The idea being that we should sort of democratize the whole GitOps methodology and let it be used by anyone, right? You don't have to actually use Argo to use that, but it'll give you the same methodology and the tools. And in a similar manner, this is what we're doing with GitLab, for example. More recently, GitLab is using the GitOps engine also to sort of tie it into their core, products.
So I want to ask you about the Argo CD Operator, and how you're working now with OpenShift on it. And I'm curious how much you did leverage OpenShift's experience in building operators to build your own, because they do have a lot of experience in this regard. They really kind of developed the whole approach.
It is, right. So, and it's interesting. First, I should state this, that the Argo CD Operator is a contribution from Red Hat, right? So it's not something that we developed, right? It's actually contributed by Red Hat to the Argo project, and primarily we've been working with the OpenShift team a lot over the past year because there's a lot of OpenShift customers that have started using Argo CD, and we wanted to provide a seamless experience for OpenShift customers to sort of fully leverage Argo CD, right? So the Argo CD Operator was actually developed by Red Hat, contributed back to the community, and it includes some additional features that are unique, right? Like things like backup and restore. The visualization of the metrics that you see, using like industry tools, right? We're using Prometheus and Grafana, but these are now incorporated in the operator itself, right?
Terrific. So there, the Intuit folks had a number of interesting talks at KubeCon this year, and one is about a data processing platform called Spock. I haven't heard of this before. Do you know anything about this project?
Yes. So first of all, the nomenclature is important, right? Spock actually, refers to Spark on Kubernetes. Has a good name, but again, this is also another addition to sort of our philosophy of making whatever tools we're doing available to the community, but also simplifying usage, right? So we extensively internally we use EMR, and Yarn from AWS, for example. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to utilize our Kubernetes infrastructure, right? The same infrastructure that we are running everything else on. We wanted to use that, and just naturally, we prefer to use containers versus shell scripts, and we wanted to use the Kubernetes scheduler versus Yarn, right, to make it easy. So this was a natural transition for us as we looked at this. We said, okay, if we can run Spark on Kubernetes, we get the same benefits that we're getting. And we can use this as a construct for all of our data processing jobs, right? And leverage what we've built already. So that was sort of the reasoning behind Spock.
Excellent. There was another talk at KubeCon about multi-region tracing. You guys got thousands of apps, so this must be a huge challenge. Maybe could you talk a bit about the challenges that Intuit has with tracing and debugging faulty apps?
Yeah, I mean, as I alluded to earlier, right, we've grown, right? So we have over 200 clusters, we have over 2,500 services, and one of the things that we started seeing was even though we built a lot of the core infrastructure when it came to logging and monitoring into the core platform, right? Utilizing Prometheus, and we use Splunk, for example, for logging. We use Wavefront for monitoring. Tracing was relatively new. Trace also sort of lends a lot of leverage, right? It generates a lot of data, but it's data that is very, very crucial and directly applicable when you're debugging or looking at services, right? So this was, something that we started working on. We've been working with the Open Telemetry team and starting to look at open tracing early, and starting to incorporate that into the platform that we have so that it becomes easier for service owners. So at Intuit, the general phenomenon is that we have a centralized team which operates the Kubernetes infrastructure. However, each of the service teams are responsible for their own DevOps, methodology and their tooling, right? So they can deploy at will, they monitor their services, and they make sure that they can troubleshoot and debug their individual services. So the idea is really, how can we give them a common platform for tracing and observability, and make sure that everyone's following the same processes. And this is something that we've done internally. So this is, we're beginning to roll out, this service now. Internally, we've essentially built a operational data lake where we essentially collect a lot of this information. We don't essentially store all trace data, but like summary trace data, for example, and it ties in with all of the other data that's coming in. So whether it's data from Splunk or Wavefront, or from Jira or from GitHub, right? So you can actually correlate all of this data, and we're in the midst of troubleshooting or debugging. You have one place to essentially look at the data, and you can correlate events, coming across from various realms.
So I know you have a lot of talks happening at KubeCon. I know Argo itself as a project has been mentioned a few times. It was in the opening keynote on Tuesday. So it seems like Intuit has a large presence there. I'm curious about your impressions of the event and what you're taking away from it so far. And I would love to then open it up to the rest of the team. We can have a little roundtable discussion, because I'd like to hear that from everybody else as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, KubeCon is sort of a central event for us, right? That's sort of the one event, whether it's EU, whether it's China, whether it's India more recently, and of course North America, right? We've had a presence in all of these areas, because that's the one place that we find we get to connect with the community. We also get to learn. It's also one event where we make sure that we try and send a lot of our developers to, because that's also an area for them to learn about what's happening in the industry, and then sort of bring it back, and also contribute, of course, right? So the event, it's interesting, right? Of course, this is the first virtual event that we're seeing, and for the most part, it's been fun. I actually logged in late last night, to see what was going on, and started seeing some snippets this morning as well. And I think it's been quite successful, right? So I'm actually looking forward to the North American one, because that'll be more closer to my time zone, and I can probably participate in it a lot better. Right now, I think my teams have been participating, and I've been hearing snippets in the morning or through Slack.
Hallelujah to that. Yeah.
Any surprises for you? Like anything that you found interesting or especially moving?
Well, I think you can say that our announcement with Red Hat, as well as our participation level, has been interesting, right? I've been getting a lot of feedback, and reach outs from a lot of the community on that. I think the community as a whole has been very supportive of the Argo project. So for me, this was actually a welcome surprise. I mean, we expected that there'd be a lot of reach outs and some good traction with the announcement. I was surprised at the level that we've been getting. Right?
That's great. So I want to open up to the rest of the team to get some impressions, because I know we've all been attending this week, and we like to just kind of share what our experience has been as well. So maybe Alex, you could start us off. What's your highlight of KubeCon so far?
Well, I think it's definitely on the end user focus, and it really seems to be what they're really wanting to put their attention toward. And you saw it in Priyanka's keynote and what Cheryl was talking about. And, and it speaks to, I think, some of the challenges that people are having, I think in particular in areas such as cluster management and how you manage a cluster swarm, so to speak. Would it be swarm or cluster sprawl? Not swarm, but sprawl. And then with that, I thought the conversation with IBM that IBM had today, Holly, who spoke about the pollution that comes from data centers and how important it is to be thinking about usage when you're using Kubernetes clusters, because the clusters are the unit of measurement, and they're much more difficult to manage. So those are some of the points that I saw.
She had a amazing statistic. Do you remember that one, Libby?
About the percentage is like a quarter of all clusters are just zombie clusters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chewing up cycles, doing nothing.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway of mine as well. When she said, "Turn off your cluster when you're not using it, just shut it down, for God's sake, for the sake of the planet."
Seems like there's a business opportunity there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting stat, because we keep track of that a lot, and we've noticed that autoscaling helps. So if you have not implemented a good autoscaling policy, please do, so that when clusters are not being used, at least you're scaling them down, right?
Seems like there's a community call to action there too, because she was talking about just how the clusters themselves are not as responsive as applications. You can't as easily scale them and as quickly scale them. So that may be something that the community can address as well.
It is actually, that is one of the things that we focused on very early, because if you can imagine our use case, especially during the tax season, we have tens of millions of users logging in, and it's usually during a span of time. For example, in the North American region, it's probably like between 3 p.m. and like 7 p.m. You see a lot of activity. So we actually worked on our autoscaler policies and tools to sort of scale up fast, but also scale down fast, right? So, and that's probably something we've been looking at to see if we can just maybe contribute back to the community, because it was a huge saver for us, right, to be able to do this.
Did you see that effect with the overhead of the control plane as well?
Yes.
That was something she talked about.
Exactly. The control plane, so this is an interesting one where, it's very easy for you to manage, using your autoscaling policies to manage your worker nodes, right? Typically, though, when you're in a cluster, when you set up a cluster, you're sizing your control plane for the size of the overall cluster that you expect to see, right? The number of worker nodes. So there is almost like a fixed cost attached to the control plane. And I think that is something that we probably want to solve as a community is, how can I scale that better and probably reduce, the scale when I don't need to.
I love the lens of that technical problem through climate change.
Yes.
I think that was something that I had never seen at a tech conference before. Actually, it was a keynote on the effects of climate change, and then having some real actual, points to address I guess a to-do list for the community now and how to address it. So it's great. Job, I want to hear what your top takeaway was.
Well, mine kind of came out of left field, and I think what surprised me most this year was the increasing focus on edge computing. Now, edge computing was called Internet of Things before that, and it's basically it used to be known as embedded computing, and it's always been like next year's big thing. But this year, it really came into focus, thanks largely to Rancher's K3S. Now, this is a stripped down version of Kubernetes that can be easily deployed, but is meant to run primarily on in production settings. And Rancher, they've been having success with K3S over the past year in terms of downloads and deploys, and it kind of came into focus now that SUSE is in the process of acquiring Rancher. But there's a definite energy around K3S, and you really saw it this year. And what surprised me is, Rancher's Shannon Williams, I believe he's one of the co-founders, mentioned that he was just so overwhelmed with the number of use cases that started pouring in, actually first at last year's KubeCon. And what was surprising is more people were coming to him to talk about Edge and K3S than the data center or the traditional hybrid cloud implementations, which I never really thought about it before. But yeah, it's and this kind of shifts the landscape quite a bit, actually. When you think about Kubernetes, you think about scalability and large scale services running, but at the edge, it's a different set of challenges. And what people are starting to find about Kubernetes, either through K3S or through other distributions, is that it answers a lot of other good needs. For instance, security, automation. IoT is just this field of verticals where there are platforms for different industries, and you have to find people to maintain it, and that's a problem. And so something like Kubernetes, which brings the portable workload capability, is like a godsend for a lot of industries. I think the danger here also is, as there's a shift of gravity, will there be a bifurcation of Kubernetes into two camps, the data center or the edge? I mean, they're different needs. Or, like Linux, will they be able to, Kubernetes be able to serve all the different users across the different use cases?
One of the things that's noteworthy in that is some of the prior use cases that we actually saw for Kubernetes a few years ago were actually edge cases. And so I believe it was actually Rancher who was talking about Kubernetes basically being deployed to individual restaurants, I think part of the Chick-fil-A chain. And we've also heard about Kubernetes. Actually, one of the things you actually have heard is like this actually precedes Kubernetes with Mesos, and how Mesos was actually used on cruise ship networks. So they would actually have a server on each of their cruise ships. And so I wonder if this is just mini data centers, really, that we're starting to see emerge.
Yeah, it's interesting because I recall when we first started playing with containers, not even Kubernetes, right? We started with Mesos, with Docker. Actually, the first exercise we did was take Mesos and start putting it on a Raspberry Pi, right? And just to see, hey, could we use that as a development platform, right? And and so it's very interesting with K3S now to kind of see that and to see, okay, this is a much a stripped down version of Kubernetes that could be used as a standalone environment, right?
So Richard, what was your top takeaway?
Well, since I'm kind of on the opposite side of the world to Europe, so my experience so far has been watching stuff on demand, and there's a series of serverless presentations that happen overnight my time that I plan on watching hopefully today or the next couple of days. in particular, topic of interest is stateful serverless. That's a trending topic at KubeCon this year, and there are about 3 presentations on that particular topic that I'm planning on checking out and perhaps writing up as part of my current column series about serverless. So so I'll be checking into that today, I think.
Did you want to say something, Pratik? I didn't want to interrupt you. So come off mute.
I lost my audio for some reason, so please can you repeat that? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. I was going to say I lost my audio, so I did not get that last question. So.
Oh, he was just talking about stateful serverless as a trend that he's seeing emerge at KubeCon.
Yeah, so that for me personally and for Intuit right now, that's one area where we've been following quite closely, and primarily because we actually do use a lot of Lambda serverless calls and functions within Intuit, and we've been seeing a growth, right? And so actually one of the initiatives that we have this year is really to start thinking hard about how do we bring that into the fold of our overall environment, making sure that it is just as secure and scalable and trackable, from a monitoring perspective as the rest of the environment that we have today. So this is actually one of the initiatives that we have this year, is to really start looking deeply into what the community has done and what the commercial offerings are, and seeing if there's some way to sort of tie the two together, or pick something, right? Pick something that we'll standardize on.
You see that potential there, though, of it really kind of becoming core to your Kubernetes platform.
We do, because we do see there are several use cases which warrant having that scale, sort of the function level scaling, and the ease of use that a lot of our users are finding, right? So it does take time, right, to set up a Kubernetes cluster or namespace and get everything organized, versus if there was a quick thing that you wanted to do, then writing a function makes a lot of sense a lot of times. What you want to be careful of is you sort of can very quickly divert to the point where everything becomes a function, and that's really not where you want to go, right? So this was a very hotly debated topic internally at Intuit last year when we were looking at this, and we made a choice at the time that we wanted to focus on our core Kubernetes infrastructure first, and then come back to this. And we come back to this with very specific use cases that we have identified to leverage this new technology for. Right?
Well, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Pratik. It was really great to have you here and get your take on all of our takes as well. So I hope you have a great rest of your KubeCon. And hopefully we'll be able to catch up again soon, hear more about how Intuit's progressing on its projects and involvement in the community.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Job.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody,
Thanks,
for
Pratik.
tuning in.